It's 1942. Opel Blitz military trucks rumble across the war-torn fields of Europe. From transporting troops and supplies to delivering weapons for the Third Reich, the Opel Blitz has become an indispensable tool for the success of the Blitzkrieg, a true symbol of Nazi logistics and power. But there's an uncomfortable paradox here. These tireless machines of war weren't designed by an engineer loyal to the regime, nor were they built in any state-owned German facility. Quite the opposite. They belonged to Opel. And Opel, since 1929, had been owned by General Motors, one of Detroit's automotive giants, and a key supplier of civilian and military equipment for the Allied forces. How was it possible that American capital could run behind the scenes in service of the Führer's military machine? What consequences did Opel face after the Second World War? And how did it manage to survive into the present day? This is the story of Opel, a brand founded more than 160 years ago as a symbol of German ingenuity, absorbed by American interests, actively collaborating with the Nazi Party under the lucrative watch of its international representatives, and which, even today, continues to carve its own path on the asphalt, albeit with a much lower profile. The story of Opel begins in August 1862, when a 25-year-old named Adam Opel assembled his very first sewing machine in a small workshop in Rüsselsheim, a town near present-day Frankfurt. Born in 1837, Adam was the eldest son of a master locksmith. From a young age, he learned the art of working with metal, the meticulous craft of locks and mechanisms. His destiny seemed written to inherit the family business, but his ambitions lay elsewhere. He dreamed of seeing Paris, and he did. After a journey through Liège, Brussels, and London, he finally arrived in the French capital. There, he encountered something that would change his life: the sewing machine, a technological innovation in the midst of a boom. Fascinated by its complexity and usefulness, Adam decided to dedicate himself fully to this new market. Upon returning to Rüsselsheim in 1862, he founded his first workshop. In no time, the quality of his machines positioned him as one of the most reliable manufacturers in Germany. What set him apart was his adaptability. Adam designed each machine to meet the specific needs of his clients. This customization, combined with disciplined production, allowed his company to scale quickly. Soon, the workshop became too small, and he moved into a larger factory. By the end of the 19th century, Opel had become one of Europe's leading exporters of sewing machines. But Adam didn't stop there. In 1886, captivated by the rise of personal mobility, he ventured into the bicycle business. He started with velocipedes, then tricycles, and eventually safety bicycles. In 1888, he opened the first facility dedicated exclusively to their production. Opel became a pioneer in implementing innovations such as rubber tires, ball bearings, and freewheel hubs. By the 1920s, the company bearing his name had become the largest bicycle manufacturer in the world. Ironically, Adam was not a supporter of the automobile. He considered cars dangerous and unreliable. His vision was practical, almost austere. Mobility should be useful, not spectacular. For this reason, he never built a single car. Adam Opel died in September 1895, never knowing that his sons would forever change the fate of the company. Karl, Wilhelm, Heinrich, Fritz, and Ludwig Opel inherited not only the infrastructure, but also a modern industrial mindset. In 1899, they partnered with Friedrich Lutzmann, an automotive engineer from Dessau, and launched the first Opel car. The partnership was short-lived, but it marked the beginning. By 1906, they had already produced 1,000 units. And in 1909, with the iconic Dr. Wagen, they offered a car for less than half the price of the competition, about 3,500 German marks. The automobile was no longer just a luxury, it was becoming a relatively accessible tool. At the time, the automotive market was still in its infancy, but Opel was already one step ahead. Through strategic agreements, technical innovation, and aggressive production expansion, the brand became, by 1914, Germany's largest car manufacturer, surpassing competitors like Benz and Daimler. Its industrial capacity and reputation as a symbol of progress placed it at the forefront. During World War I, like many other companies, Opel shifted part of its production to the war effort. But the real challenge came in the post-war years. The economic collapse of the Weimar Republic, marked by hyperinflation, mass unemployment, and social unrest, eroded domestic consumption. Even so, Opel survived, thanks in part to its size and flexible structure which allowed it to adapt. In 1924, they even implemented an assembly line, modeled after Henry Ford's, with the hugely successful Laubfrosch model. The real blow came with the 1929 stock market crash. The Great Depression shook the foundations of the global economy. For a company like Opel, heavily dependent on the domestic market, the situation was critical. Exports plummeted, credit vanished, and the Opel family realized they needed more than austerity, they needed backing. That year of economic disaster, the Detroit giant entered the scene. General Motors launched a global expansion campaign, acquiring 80% of Opel for $33 million at the time. 3 years later, in 1931, it took full control. Opel had now become part of a transatlantic industrial empire. The family gradually withdrew from operational control, though they retained honorary positions. In their place, key figures such as Alfred P. Sloan and James D. Mooney, GM's vice president for international operations, took over. Mooney would later establish direct relations with high-ranking members of the Nazi regime. Until 1933, Opel operated as an American-owned subsidiary with a German face. But with Hitler's rise to power and the consolidation of the Third Reich, the landscape changed drastically. Cooperation between major corporations and Nazi institutions became a key piece of the new economic order. And while the Night of the Long Knives marked a new phase of violence and political purge, Opel's assembly lines kept turning, quietly synchronized with the gears of power. What had begun as a family dream, forged through craftsmanship and ingenuity, was now becoming a machine serving far darker expansionist ambitions. When Adolf Hitler came to power, Germany was broken, resentful over the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, and torn apart by years of economic crisis. His promise was clear: restore German glory, reindustrialize the nation, and lead the people back to work, order, and supremacy. To achieve this, he needed more than Goebbels' propaganda. He needed engines. From the very beginning, the Third Reich understood that its geopolitical ambitions required a powerful industrial base. Few things would prove more strategic than transportation, troop mobility, frontline supply, and national logistics. The truck was as important as the rifle. That's where Opel came in. Since 1929, under GM control, the brand had become a leading automotive force in Europe. Its facilities in Rüsselsheim, expertise in mass production, and distribution network made it the perfect fit for the Nazi project. Opel was so strategically valuable that, while Hitler, together with Ferdinand Porsche, promoted his ambitious People's Car project, the future Volkswagen, GM countered with its highly successful 1935 Opel Olympia, named in honor of the Berlin Olympic Games. It was cheaper, more modern, and more accessible. But in that memorable year, the most significant launch was the Opel Blitz, a light truck originally designed for civilian use but rapidly militarized. When the war broke out, the Opel Blitz became the logistical backbone of the Wehrmacht, transporting troops, weapons, food, and supplies. From the invasion of Poland to the beaches of Normandy, wherever Nazi soldiers marched, a Blitz followed. Opel plants produced tens of thousands of units. They also manufactured aircraft components and engines for light tanks. German efficiency reached its peak, but at what cost? As the conflict intensified, forced labor under extreme conditions was introduced, ranging from prisoners of war to civilians deported from Eastern Europe. In Detroit, General Motors projected a public image of patriotism and support for the Allied cause. In practice, however, its relationship with subsidiaries across the Atlantic remained ambiguous. At the time, GM claimed to have lost operational control of Opel after the outbreak of the conflict. Yet multiple investigations, including declassified files and testimony from the U.S. Treasury Department, suggest that coordination continued indirectly until at least 1942. One key figure in this relationship was James D. Mooney, GM's Vice President for International Operations, who visited Germany several times and personally met with high-ranking members of the regime, including Hitler and Göring. These meetings were justified as corporate diplomacy, but they reflected just how far business could transcend political flags. He wasn't alone. From GM headquarters in Detroit, Alfred P. Sloan, then president of the company, opted for strategic silence. While promoting industrial progress in the United States, he avoided any public condemnation of the Nazi regime or Opel's operations. Graham K. Howard, Director of International Operations, openly defended the idea that corporations should operate beyond ideologies, arguing in his book America and a New World Order that business decisions should be guided by economic interests rather than moral commitments. In Germany, Wilhelm von Opel, son of the founder, no longer in direct control of the company, joined the Nazi Party and actively donated to its campaigns. And at the helm of the subsidiary, Rudolf A. Fleischer, Opel's general director during the Third Reich, coordinated production with industrial precision while overseeing a workforce of around 8,000 people under brutal conditions. Together, executives, bureaucrats, and technocrats turned Opel into a factory at the regime's service, a silent chain of command where steel and profit spoke louder than any ideology. In 1944, Opel's factories were bombed by the Allies, an American-owned company destroyed by American planes for producing vehicles for their enemies. But the paradox didn't end there. Years later, General Motors took advantage of a federal compensation program intended for companies with damaged overseas assets. And in 1967, it received $33 million at the time for the damage sustained at its Opel plant. A true story that raises an uncomfortable question. Where does war end, and where does business begin? Opel's story is far from unique. Ford, IBM, and ITT also maintained economic and strategic ties with the Nazi regime. But the Opel GM case stands out for its scale, its duration, and the moral ambiguity surrounding it. At the Nuremberg trials, Industrial corporations were not the main focus. The architects of genocide were condemned, but not those who profited from the engines that powered it. The economic machinery that sustained the Third Reich was treated with leniency. The priority was to rebuild Europe, and for that, factories needed to be running, not tied up in court proceedings. General Motors regained full control of Opel almost immediately after the fall of the regime. None of its top executives faced charges. Even figures like Wilhelm von Opel, a member of the Nazi Party, or James Mooney, the corporate mediator with the regime, escaped any significant consequences. The city of Rüsselsheim, which had fallen under the American occupation zone, facilitated the restart of operations. With logistical support, political protection, and indirect funding from the Marshall Plan, Opel re-emerged as a key player in Germany's reconstruction. The Cold War demanded a strong capitalist Germany, and Opel was a valuable piece on that chessboard. During the 1950s and 1960s, the German subsidiary became an emblem of the Wirtschaftswunder, the so-called German economic miracle. Models like the Record, Kadett, Capitan, and Manta filled the streets of Europe. Reliable, affordable, functional cars, often with a touch of personality, became part of the everyday landscape of the new Western middle class. Opel expanded into Belgium, the Netherlands, Italy, Spain, and the United Kingdom, standing out as a preferred alternative to local brands. By the late 1960s, Opel controlled 20% of the European car market. In Germany, saying, "My first car was an Opel," was as common as Americans saying, "My first car was a Chevy." But beneath this renewed image of success lay a deliberate, quiet omission. The past was pushed to the margins, and any uncomfortable memory of having once served the Führer's interests was swallowed by the logic of economic growth. There was no reparation, no symbolic gesture, only production. By the 1970s and 1980s, the landscape of success began to shift, and the economic shine started to fade. The arrival of Japanese brands, the oil crisis, and GM's slow decision-making on the global stage began to drag Opel toward irrelevance. While the competition innovated, Opel stuck to old formulas. What had once been a symbol of efficiency began to feel outdated. Trapped in the bureaucracy of a parent company that didn't understand Europe, Opel gradually became a reflection of industrial arrogance, stubbornly resisting change. The new millennium brought a decade of wear and tear for Opel. Trapped within the corporate framework of a declining General Motors, the German brand began to suffer systematic cutbacks, plant closures, and a growing loss of autonomy. Its creative capacity was swallowed by global strategies that no longer understood the European market. During the 2000s, Opel tried to hold its ground with models like the Astra, Insignia, and Corsa, but the brand narrative was no longer clear. Campaigns spoke of youth, sustainability, and technology, yet without coherence or continuity. Before long, the Opel of the German economic miracle had faded away, and the 2008 global financial crisis delivered the final blow. General Motors filed for bankruptcy and survived only thanks to a historic multi-billion-dollar bailout from the U.S. Treasury, led by Barack Obama. In that restructuring process, Opel was put on the table. Its sale was debated, its dissolution even considered. But GM chose to keep it more out of inertia than vision. The price, however, was steep. Thousands of jobs lost, halted investments, and a fragmented identity. Finally, in 2017, General Motors decided to close the chapter. Opel was sold to the French PSA Group, Peugeot Citroën, which later merged into the Stellantis conglomerate in 2021. This marked the end of more than just a contractual relationship. It closed a transatlantic union that, for nearly 90 years, had intertwined North American industrial might with one of the most symbolic names in German engineering. The sale was no simple act, it was a strategic retreat. General Motors was abandoning a continent it had never truly understood since the war. After years of late decisions, positioning errors, and excess bureaucracy, Opel had become a burden that had to be let go. Under Stellantis, Opel seeks to reinvent itself, though now without the creative drive or cultural roots that once made it unique. It has adopted a more restrained profile, focused on electrification, shared platforms, and technical efficiency. Yet the legacy remains. For decades, Opel was an icon of affordable mobility, technical progress without ostentation, and a promise of the future for the middle class. And while Stellantis looks ahead, the silence over Opel's uncomfortable past remains intact. The Opel case is not just a historical anomaly. It is the X-ray of a century in which technical advancement was not always synonymous with human progress. From Adam Opel's small workshop crafting sewing machines to becoming a cog in the machinery of war, and later a symbol of a rebuilt Germany, Opel has embodied different visions of the future, and today it does so under another flag. And what about you? What's your take on Opel's story? Did you know just how indispensable this legendary company was to Hitler's ideals? If this story caught your attention, you might be interested in discovering how a powerful dynasty from Piedmont shaped the destiny of an entire nation. See you in the next video.